The kitchen clock ticked louder than Riley's heartbeat, each second a hammer against her resolve. She stood frozen, gripping a scorched pot, as billionaire Victor Langston's voice thundered through the penthouse. "You're ruining everything," he bellowed, his face a mask of rage, oblivious to the truth simmering beneath her calm exterior. Riley Carter, 28, had been the nanny for Victor's 6-year-old daughter, Lila, for only 3 months, but the job felt like a lifetime. The sprawling Manhattan penthouse, with its marble floors and panoramic views of the city, was a world apart from her modest Brooklyn apartment. She'd taken the job to fund her graduate studies in social work, drawn by the promise of stability and the chance to care for a bright, curious child like Lila. But Victor, a 42-year-old tech mogul with piercing blue eyes and a reputation for ruthless precision, made every day a tightrope walk. His wealth couldn't mask his volatility, and tonight, a simple mistake, burning dinner in a pot she wasn't supposed to use, had ignited his fury. "Why can't you follow basic instructions?" Victor snapped, pacing the sleek kitchen. His tailored suit seemed to amplify his authority, but Riley noticed the tremor in his hands, a crack in his polished facade. "That was a custom Le Creuset. Do you know what that costs?" Riley's jaw tightened. She wanted to snap back, to tell him that a pot, no matter how expensive, wasn't worth this tirade. But she needed this job. Lila needed her too. The little girl, with her gap-toothed smile and endless questions, had become Riley's anchor in this storm of wealth and ego. So, she swallowed her pride, her voice steady. "I'm sorry, Mr. Langston. It won't happen again." Victor's eyes narrowed, searching her face for defiance, but Riley held his gaze, her calm a shield. He turned away, muttering about incompetence, and stormed out. The kitchen fell silent, save for the faint hum of the city below. Riley exhaled, setting the pot in the sink, her hands shaking not from fear but from the weight of secrets she carried. She wasn't just a nanny. She was a woman in love, a love that could unravel everything. Mateo Alvarez, the 30-year-old gardener who tended the penthouse's rooftop oasis, was her heart's quiet rebellion. Their stolen moments, whispered conversations under the stars, hands brushing as they passed in the hallway, were a lifeline in this cold, opulent world. But Mateo was a secret Victor could never know, not because of their jobs, but because of who they were to each other and the truth they shared about Victor's past. Riley met Mateo on her first day, when Lila dragged her to the rooftop to see the magic flowers. Mateo, with his easy smile and soil-stained hands, was coaxing life into a bed of lavender. His warmth disarmed her, a stark contrast to Victor's icy demeanor. Over weeks, their conversations grew deeper, from shared dreams to whispered confessions. Mateo was openly gay, his identity a quiet strength, while Riley, bisexual and guarded, found herself opening up to him in ways she hadn't with anyone else. Their bond wasn't just romantic. It was a pact to protect each other in a world that judged too quickly. Victor, however, was a man who saw the world in transactions. He'd built his empire, Langston Tech, on data and control, but his personal life was a mess. His wife had left when Lila was 2, and he'd raised her alone, or rather, through a revolving door of nannies. Riley was the first to stay longer than a month, largely because Lila adored her. But Victor's temper kept everyone at arm's length, and Riley sensed something deeper driving his anger, something tied to the past Mateo had hinted at. One night, as Riley tucked Lila into bed, the girl whispered, "Why is Daddy always mad?" Riley smoothed her hair, unsure how to answer. "He's just got a lot on his mind, sweetheart," she said, but the question lingered. She'd seen Victor's late-night pacing, the way he stared at old photos in his study. Mateo had told her rumors, whispers of a scandal Victor had buried, a betrayal that had hardened him. But Riley didn't press. She had her own secrets to guard. The next morning, Mateo caught her in the rooftop garden, his eyes bright with mischief. "You survived the pot incident," he teased, tossing her a sprig of mint. Riley laughed, the sound rare and precious. "Barely," she said, tucking the mint behind her ear. Their fingers brushed, and for a moment, the city's chaos faded. But the moment shattered when Victor's voice crackled through the intercom, summoning Riley downstairs. Victor was in his study, a glass of whiskey in hand despite the early hour. "I need you to take Lila to her art class today," he said, not looking up from his laptop. "And don't let her wander off like last time." Riley nodded, used to his curt demands. But as she turned to leave, she noticed a framed photo on his desk. A younger Victor with a man she didn't recognize, both smiling at a beach. The man's face was familiar, though she couldn't place it. Victor caught her glance and slammed the frame face down. "Get to work," he barked. The day passed in a blur of Lila's laughter and paint-splattered smocks, but Riley's mind was on that photo. When she returned to the penthouse, Mateo was waiting, his expression tense. "We need to talk," he whispered, pulling her to a quiet corner of the rooftop. "I found something in the storage room. Old letters. They're about Victor and someone named Julian." Riley's heart sank. Julian. The name stirred a memory. Mateo had mentioned him once, a friend from Victor's past who'd vanished after a falling out. "What do they say?" she asked. Mateo hesitated. "They're love letters, Riley. From Victor to Julian. They were together years ago before Langston Tech took off." The revelation hit like a tidal wave. Victor, the man who ruled his empire with an iron fist, had once loved a man. A truth he'd buried so deeply it had turned to rage. Riley's mind raced. If Victor was hiding this, what else was he capable of? And how would he react if he knew about her and Mateo? As the sun set over Manhattan, casting the rooftop in shades of amber, Riley and Mateo sat on a bench, hands clasped. The city hummed below, oblivious to the storm brewing in their hearts. They were falling in love, but the truth about Victor was a shadow they couldn't escape. Riley knew one thing. She wouldn't let Victor's anger destroy them. Not her, not Mateo, and not Lila. Image prompt for Part 2. A sweeping aerial view of a quiet Brooklyn rooftop at twilight, where Riley, a 28-year-old black woman with a gentle yet determined expression, and Mateo, a 30-year-old Hispanic man with a warm, open smile, share a stolen moment. They lean against a weathered brick wall, their shoulders touching, eyes locked in a mix of love and resolve. The city skyline sparkles faintly in the distance, contrasting the intimate foreground. A small chalkboard propped on a nearby planter reads, "Their love defies secrets," under 30 characters, blending seamlessly into the urban setting without overpowering the emotional depth of the scene. The letters changed everything. Riley couldn't shake the image of Victor's handwriting, raw and vulnerable, confessing love to a man named Julian. She and Mateo sat in the dim light of her Brooklyn apartment, the letters spread across her coffee table like relics of a forgotten war. Each word was a glimpse into a Victor she didn't recognize, one capable of tenderness, not just tyranny. Mateo traced a finger over a faded envelope. "He was different back then," he said softly. "Before the money, before the world turned him cold." Riley nodded, but her mind was on Lila. If Victor was hiding this part of himself, what did it mean for his daughter? And what did it mean for her and Mateo, whose love was a fragile secret in this house of glass? The next day, Riley returned to the penthouse with a knot in her chest. Lila was at school, and Victor was in a board meeting downtown, leaving the apartment eerily quiet. She moved through her duties, tidying Lila's room, prepping dinner, but her thoughts kept drifting to the letters. She hadn't meant to snoop, but curiosity pulled her to Victor's study. The door was ajar, and the photo she'd seen before sat upright again. Victor and Julian frozen in a moment of joy. She hesitated, then opened a drawer, finding a worn journal tucked beneath files. The journal was a chronicle of Victor's early days, his dreams of building a tech empire intertwined with his love for Julian. But the tone shifted halfway through. Anger, betrayal, a cryptic mention of the deal that broke us. Riley's heart pounded. Whatever had happened between Victor and Julian wasn't just a breakup. It was a wound that still bled. She was so absorbed she didn't hear the elevator ding. Victor's voice cut through the silence. "What are you doing in here?" His tone was low, dangerous. Riley spun around, the journal still in her hands. His eyes locked onto it, and for a moment, she saw fear, not anger, in his gaze. I was looking for Lila's art supplies," she stammered, shoving the journal back. Victor stepped closer, his presence suffocating. "You're lying," he said, his voice a blade. "Get out. Now." Riley fled to the rooftop, her breath ragged. Mateo was there, pruning roses, and one look at her face told him everything. "He caught you?" he asked, dropping his shears. She nodded, tears stinging her eyes. "He's going to fire me, Mateo. And if he finds out about us." Mateo pulled her into his arms, his warmth grounding her. "We'll figure this out," he whispered. "Together." But the weight of Victor's secrets pressed heavier than ever. They weren't just hiding their love. They were caught in a web of truths that could destroy them all. That night, Riley couldn't sleep. She sat on her fire escape, the Brooklyn skyline a jagged silhouette against the stars. Mateo had promised to dig deeper, to find out what had happened to Julian. But the more they uncovered, the more dangerous it felt. Victor wasn't just a man with a temper. He was a man with a past he'd kill to keep buried. The next morning, Lila's laughter pulled Riley back to the present. The girl was drawing in the living room, her crayons scattered across the floor. "Riley, look," she said, holding up a picture of two stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. "It's you and Mateo." Riley's heart stopped. She knelt beside Lila, forcing a smile. "That's beautiful, sweetie. Let's keep it our secret. Okay?" But secrets were slipping through their fingers. When Victor returned that evening, his mood was darker than usual. He barely acknowledged Riley, his eyes fixed on his phone. She overheard him on a call, his voice low and urgent. "No, it's handled. No one knows about Julian." Riley's blood ran cold. She texted Mateo, "We need to meet now." They met at a small cafe in Brooklyn, far from Victor's reach. Mateo slid a folder across the table. More documents he'd found in the storage room. "Julian didn't just disappear," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He was part of Langston Tech's early days, Victor's partner in every sense. But something went wrong, a deal, a betrayal. Julian left, and Victor erased him." Riley's mind raced. If Victor had hidden this, what else was he capable of? And how long could she and Mateo keep their own truth hidden? As they left the cafe, their hands brushed, a silent vow to face whatever came next. But the city around them felt like a tightening noose, and Riley knew the truth was a spark that could set everything ablaze. The bookstore's quiet hum was a sanctuary, but Riley felt like a fugitive. She and Mateo pored over the documents, each page a shard of Victor's hidden past. The truth about Julian was no longer a shadow. It was a blade, sharp and close. The papers revealed a startup called Nexus, co-founded by Victor and Julian in their 20s. They'd been partners in love and business, their dreams as intertwined as their lives. But a deal with a major investor had gone sour, and Julian had taken the fall, publicly humiliated while Victor rose to billionaire status. The final document was a non-disclosure agreement, signed by Julian, banishing him from Victor's world. Riley's stomach churned. Victor hadn't just erased Julian. He'd rewritten their story to bury his own heart. "We can't keep this quiet," Mateo said, his voice steady but urgent. "If Victor's hiding this, he's hiding more." Riley nodded, but fear clawed at her. Exposing Victor could cost them everything. Her job, their safety, even Lila. Yet staying silent felt like betraying the love she and Mateo were fighting to protect. Back at the penthouse, Victor's mood was a storm cloud. He barely spoke, but his eyes followed Riley, sharp and suspicious. When Lila ran to her, chattering about a school project, Victor snapped, "Lila, go to your room." The girl's face fell, and Riley's heart ached. She wanted to shield Lila from her father's anger, but she felt the walls closing in. That night, Mateo texted her a single word, Julian. He'd found him, or at least a trace. Julian Rivera, now 43, was living in upstate New York, running a small community center. Mateo had reached out, and Julian had agreed to meet. "This could change everything," Mateo said when they met on the rooftop. "The city's lights a distant pulse." "But it's dangerous, Riley. If Victor finds out." "I know," she whispered, her hand finding his. Their love was a quiet rebellion, but it gave her courage. "We have to do this. For us. For Lila." Mateo nodded, his eyes reflecting the stars. They were in too deep to turn back. The next day, Riley took Lila to the park, her mind racing. Lila's laughter as she chased pigeons was a fleeting bomb, but Riley couldn't shake the weight of what they were about to do. She glanced at her phone. Mateo was already on a train to meet Julian. When he returned that evening, his face was grim. "Julian's not bitter," Mateo said, meeting her in Central Park. "But he's broken. Victor didn't just betray him, he destroyed his reputation. Julian thinks Victor's anger comes from guilt, but he's too proud to face it." Riley listened, her heart heavy. She saw Victor's rage in a new light. Not just arrogance, but a man haunted by his own choices. They sat on a bench, the same one where they'd first admitted their feelings. "What do we do?" Riley asked, her voice trembling. Mateo took her hand, his touch a lifeline. "We confront him, not with anger, but with the truth. He needs to face it, for Lila's sake." But the plan unraveled faster than they'd expected. When Riley returned to the penthouse, Victor was waiting, his face a mask of controlled fury. "You've been talking to Mateo," he said, his voice low. "I saw you two on the rooftop. What are you hiding?" Riley's heart pounded, but she held her ground. "Nothing, Mr. Langston. We're just friends." The lie tasted bitter, but Victor's eyes bored into her, searching for cracks. "You're on thin ice, Riley," he said, turning away. "Don't test me." As she left the penthouse that night, Riley felt the weight of every secret. Hers, Mateo's, Victor's. She and Mateo were fighting for their love, but the truth about Julian was a bomb waiting to detonate. And in the quiet of her apartment, she realized something else. Lila was the key. The little girl, caught in the crossfire of her father's past, deserved a truth that could set them all free. The train to upstate New York felt like a journey to the edge of the world. Riley stared out the window, the city's concrete fading into rolling hills, her hand brushing Mateo's as he sat beside her. They were meeting Julian today, and the weight of it pressed against her chest like a stone. Julian Rivera was nothing like the ghost in Victor's journal. At 43, he was lean and weathered, his dark hair streaked with gray, but his smile was warm as he greeted them at the community center. The building was modest, filled with children's laughter and the smell of fresh paint. Julian led them to a small office, his eyes flickering with recognition when Riley mentioned Victor. "He doesn't know you're here, does he?" Julian asked, his voice soft but heavy. Riley shook her head, and Mateo explained what they'd found. The letters, the journal, the truth about Nexus. Julian listened, his hands folded tightly. Victor loved me once, he said finally. But he chose power over us. When the investor deal went south, he let me take the blame. I lost everything, my career, my name. He rebuilt his life, but I don't think he ever forgave himself. Riley's heart ached. Julian's pain mirrored her own fear, of losing Mateo, of losing Lila. Why didn't you fight back? She asked. Julian's smile was sad. I loved him too much to destroy him, and he had Lila to protect. He paused, his eyes searching theirs. You two, you're in love, aren't you? Be careful. Victor doesn't let go easily. The warning lingered as they returned to the city. Riley felt torn between her loyalty to Lila, her love for Mateo, and the truth about Victor. When they reached the penthouse, Lila ran to her, arms wide. Where were you? She asked, her voice small. Riley hugged her tightly, whispering, just making things right, sweetie. But things were far from right. Victor's suspicion had grown, and that evening, he cornered Riley in the kitchen. I checked the security footage, he said, his voice ice cold. You and Mateo sneaking around. What are you planning? Riley's pulse raced, but she kept her voice steady. We're not planning anything, Mr. Langston. We care about Lila. Same as you. Victor's eyes darkened. Don't lie to me. I know you've been digging into my past. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. If you're smart, you'll stop. For your own sake. Riley barely slept that night, her mind a storm of fear and resolve. Mateo met her at dawn on the rooftop, his face etched with worry. He's on to us, he said. We need to decide. Do we confront him now or wait? Riley took his hand, her heart steady despite the chaos. We confront him, but we do it for Lila. She deserves a father who's free from this guilt. They planned carefully, knowing one wrong move could cost them everything. Riley spent the day with Lila, helping her with a school project about family. When Lila drew a picture of herself with Riley and Mateo, her small voice asked, Can you be my family too? Riley's throat tightened. We'll always be here for you, she promised, hoping it wasn't a lie. That night, they waited until Lila was asleep. Victor was in his study, the glow of his laptop casting shadows. Riley knocked, Mateo at her side. We need to talk, she said, her voice firm. Victor looked up, his expression unreadable. About what? He asked, but his tone betrayed his fear. About Julian, Mateo said, stepping forward. We know what happened. The letters, the deal, everything. Victor's face paled, but he didn't speak. Riley pressed on, her voice soft but unyielding. You're angry, Mr. Langston, but it's not at me or Mateo or even that pot. It's at yourself. You loved him and you let him go. For a moment, silence swallowed the room. Then Victor stood, his hands trembling. You don't know what you're talking about, he said, but his voice cracked. Riley saw it then. The man behind the billionaire, haunted by a love he'd buried. And in that moment, she knew the truth could either break him or set them all free. Victor's silence was louder than his rage had ever been. The study felt like a courtroom, with Riley and Mateo standing as witnesses to a truth he couldn't deny. You don't understand, Victor finally said, his voice raw. I didn't just lose Julian. I lost myself. Riley's heart pounded, but she stepped closer, her voice gentle. You can find yourself again, Mr. Langston. For Lila. For you. Mateo nodded, his hand brushing hers, a silent anchor. Victor sank into his chair, his face buried in his hands. For the first time, Riley saw not the billionaire, but the man broken, human, and aching. They told him everything, Julian's life now, the community center, the pain he still carried. Victor listened, his eyes distant, as if seeing a life he'd tried to forget. When they finished, he whispered, I thought burying it would make it go away, but it's been killing me. The next day, Victor called Julian. Riley and Mateo weren't privy to the conversation, but when Victor emerged from his study, his eyes were red but lighter. He didn't fire Riley. Instead, he asked her to stay, his voice quieter than she'd ever heard. "Lila needs you," he said, "and I need to make things right." Weeks later, the penthouse felt different. Victor was still a work in progress, but he yelled less, listened more. He'd started therapy, a step Riley hadn't expected. Lila noticed the change, her laughter brighter, her drawings filled with hope. One evening, Victor invited Julian to dinner. It wasn't a reconciliation, not fully, but it was a start. Julian brought stories of his community center, and Lila hung on every word, her eyes wide with wonder. Riley and Mateo, meanwhile, no longer hid their love. Victor hadn't approved outright, but he hadn't fired them either. One night, on the rooftop, Mateo proposed to Riley, his voice trembling with joy. "I want a life with you," he said, slipping a simple ring onto her finger. Riley's tears fell as she said yes, the city's lights a witness to their vow. But the true victory was Lila. She'd always been the heart of their fight, the reason they'd risked everything. At her school's art show, she presented a painting, a family, not bound by blood, but by love. Victor stood beside Riley and Mateo, his arm around Lila, and for the first time he smiled without a shadow. Victor's journey wasn't over. He'd lost Julian to his own ambition, but he was learning to forgive himself. Riley and Mateo, too, had found something greater than fear. A love that could withstand secrets, a truth that could heal. And in the quiet moments, when Lila's laughter filled the penthouse, they all knew. The pot, the yelling, the pain. It had led them to a truth worth bearing.